Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure on this chilly evening to call to order our second joint meeting between the Charles County Board of Commissioners and the Charles County Planning Commission. Commissioner Deborah Davis is on her way. She's fighting the traffic down the road. She had court that went a little over schedule, so we do expect her shortly. Mr. Joe Richards was unable to attend this meeting, as was Mr. Bob Mitchell. I do expect that we will see Mr. Lou Grasso and Ms. Joan Jones show up any moment. First on our agenda this evening, I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Andrew Durr, who is the Associate and Director of Environmental Services with Whitman, Reckord and Associates, LLP. And so welcome this evening, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, and I wanted to thank the Commission for such an open and transparent process. I've worked... Mike, can you hear me? Much better. Thank you. I want to thank the Commission for an open and transparent process, and I've been working in this area in Maryland for 30 years, and I have to say I've watched the county grow, and it's been doing overall a pretty good job, and I'm very impressed with it statewide. I'm here today more as an environmental scientist. I hope to lend some insights into some questions we should be asking ourselves as we proceed. I'm grateful for the invitation, and I'd like to start out, as requested, with a little bit of background and expertise on myself and the company. I have been working on Charles County for 20 years, 10 years as a consultant. Initially, I was at the Maryland Department of Environment in the Wetlands and Waterways program. Many of the fields I do are wetlands mitigation, NEPA studies, and a lot of permitting, environmental site design. I've watched the programs grow from their infancy into what we have, and they continue to be very challenging. Previously, I worked at Leutemann Soltis Associates, and prior to that, I had 17 years at the MDE. I left as a manager in the Wetlands Waterways program. I'm currently appointed member of the Chesapeake Bay Governor's Citizens Advisory Committee for the Chesapeake Bay, Montgomery County's Forest Conservation Advisory Committee, and the Environmental Committee for the Maryland National Capital Building Industry Association. I also am very pleased to contribute to many ad hoc work groups involved in current development regulations. Some example projects I've worked on the county, which I found very stimulating. You can see many of the road projects, as well as St. Charles, Cross County Connector, various watershed studies, mitigation site searches, mostly in the context of putting together holistically into a plan, a cohesive plan where the county can grow and respect its environmental resources. We have a company resources of 575 professionals, been around 95 years, various offices. We can provide any sort of engineering and support services required. Some of the concurrent approaches we have to projects are a team approach, where we recognize today that for us to be progressive, we have to blend various disciplines, technical disciplines. Environmental science is not just biology; it's regulatory issues, it's engineering, and we need to put them all together in a team approach. And that's what these bullets all talk about, how we've expanded our effort to do just that. Currently, a best example of that is probably a TMDL program, where it's really has a lot of resources, put a lot of demands for resources upon local governments. These are many of the services we provide in addition to our consulting expertise. So we pretty much a one-stop shop for any needs a local agency may have. In fact, many of our clients are current government agencies, both local, state, and the federal level. To start stimulating our discussion a little bit, I have broken down what I like to think of as the three primary approaches to desktop analysis from an environmental perspective. Very common approaches as a planning tool are development density, impervious surface, criteria, and setback buffering. Those are very effective elements in our toolbox, but it's important we have a toolbox. I'm always concerned as more of a scientist, and that's my background, I'm not an engineer, is that if we're thinking reasonably and logically and basing our decisions on technical assumptions, A good toolbox should have many different resources to draw on, where we put them all together to cohesive decision-making process. More important, are we building on existing regulatory requirements we have in place? Is something already working? Can we improve upon it? Can we actually expand on it and do it within the context of the regulatory mandates we do have? Are we making correct technical assumptions? Are we aware of the research out there? Has somebody else already gone through the similar experiences that we can draw on? Admittedly, this whole arena of environmental regulation is a growing one. It's not static. It changes every year. I can't tell you how much hours I spend in any given week trying to keep track of what's changing and how it applies to the work we do on a site-specific level. And that's a key element to what we do. We have to take our thinking to the site. We have to go out and look at the stream. We have to look at the land, because nature is not static and nature is not consistent. Which leads me to my final point on this slide, is how do we get the most bang for a buck? Everybody's keenly aware of our resources we have today to offer to some of these programs and to improve our water quality. If we have certain limited funds, where is it best spent? Where do we get the most reduction in pollutants on a planning level and as well as a site level? These are things we have to think about. And in terms of proving our overall plan, I want to set this background. This slide was very important to me because it's important to set the background of what we have in place now. I think it's important that whatever the commissioners decide to do, we do it in the context and the framework of the regulatory programs we already have out there. This slide basically summarizes everything we have right now in the county available in our toolbox. And I think it's important we use them to the maximum extent practicable, because it just makes good sense. I put the middle ones in italics on purpose because I think it's important to know that since we're concerned about expansion and balancing growth and observing our sensitive environmental resources, we realize these are the programs we already have in place now that do exactly just that. These are mandates we have right now to clean up our waters and clean up our watersheds on our mistakes perhaps of the past, as well as proceeding in the future in a conscientious manner. The middle bullets are very important. The forest conservation law and the resource protection zone we have out there right now basically do a lot of what we want in our master plan that's being proposed right now. The Commission has the ability to expand the existing resource planning zones to capture any sensitive environmental features on the site level. So does the forest conservation law. And the Maryland Tier 2 criteria, while not a standalone permitting program, does identify, I'll show in a future slide, sensitive waters, which are also applied to the existing permitting program. The critical area program is a very similar one, already protecting our buffers. And it's very important to me to see a county as progressive as Charles County. And the one I do my most work in, make sure that we effectively interface with the programs we already have. The rest are studies we have in place with very important recommendations. All this can be talked about in detail later. I just wanted to be concise for our time limitations. These are three thought processes I usually keep in my head as we're proceeding on a large scale. Is that do we allow site-level variations of the criteria? Do we look at ways to actually look on the ground and see in what places would what approaches be applicable? Not every property is the same, not every watershed is the same. I put an example in the first bullet utilizing the existing forest stand process, which is and the first of 3 stormwater plan submittals. I didn't want to get too technical in the slides, but that's an example of how we have the mechanism in place right now to really carry out many of our applicable regulatory programs in water to achieve watershed protection. The last bullet there is also very important, I think, is that we look at planning tools as just as planning tools. I think before we use them, we need to make sure that we're making good technical assumptions and they're being applied effectively. I think buffer setbacks, impervious surface limitations, and density restrictions, they do have their purpose, and I think they can be effective depending on the site. Lately, research has shown that sometimes they can backfire. And this is part of our learning process. Spreading out development in smaller, low-density areas can actually encourage infrastructure connections and man-made activities between those developed areas. So it's something that should be looked at on a site level, and I believe whatever resulting approach we use should allow that flexibility to consider the resource itself, to go consider the river, consider the land around it. What does the comprehensive plan do? Does it build on what we know? We know, I gave you examples of a lot of programs already in place, and there is a lot of technical data we know already, and there's a lot of technical data we do not know. And time will tell whether we're headed in the right direction. I think we are right now, and I think we have still some more work to do. I'll give you an example here. This slide. Again, I'm going to pick on nitrogen here because nitrogen is a popular keystone pollutant, and we've all heard about nutrients as our primary concern in the bay. Nutrients generally refer to sediments, nitrogen, and phosphorus. They're all three synergistically combined to overtax our waters with more than what the plants like and the wildlife likes. Nitrogen is many times used as a keystone pollutant, as is phosphorus and sediments. So I picked this one from the Chesapeake Bay program, and I kind of wanted to set the framework for, without getting into much what the bars reveal, is that over the last many years we've had a steady decline in nutrients. I think it's important to know things are getting better. And this is our own data from the Chesapeake Bay program. So why we have the TMDL? Well, what it is, while it's getting better, we still have a lot of work to do. And if you look at the column on the far right, with the colors in it, that shows the Chesapeake Bay goals. So we have not reached the Chesapeake Bay goals, but doesn't mean we haven't done a good job so far, and I think we are. Isn't some other data I picked out is the Chesapeake Bay Foundation's latest model of the sources of our water quality problems. It's important to note that these are where the sources are bay-wide. To my knowledge, Charles County does not deviate significantly from that pie chart. So what we want to do is, again, think of where do we get the most bang for our buck? Are we going after the biggest sectors of the pie with what we have? Now, we're concerned with proceeding in our development pattern in a very orderly way where we respect our natural resources. I think we can do that. I think we can do that even with the old scenario. If you look at the column on the right, I've organized the existing regulatory programs, what we have, in terms of what addresses developed lands. The developed lands on the pie chart is 10%. And over on to the right, you see that developed lands under new construction, we have these current regulatory programs on the way. And then for the older development, I guess one can use the phrase the sins of our past, if you will, before we knew about stormwater management. We have the NPDES MS4 permit. I don't like acronyms, so it's Municipal Separate Stormwater Systems. That's the only regulatory hammer we really have today to clean up some of the older development and developed lands that we have. I'm pleased to see that there's a renewed interest in doing that, and I think that gets you a lot of bang for our buck, along at the same time with making sure we grow in a very sound way. The rest of the programs at the bottom are simply that. They're good studies that we have a lot of data that we can rely on in terms of establishing a framework for how we proceed. What are the types of data are out there? These are examples again. The Maryland Department of Environment has done a lot of work for us. I think what we should do is use it, make sure we're using it. So is the Corps of Engineers. The Tier 2 chart is, again, these are just examples. It's a common chart I refer to many times in planning projects because the streams in red are outlined already as high quality waters, and they already have 100-foot buffers to them. And combined with the RPZ and the critical areas, we do have good mechanisms. Now, the common denominator in all these is that these programs are refined at the ground level. They're written in such a way where once you do an environmental assessment, either through forest stand delineation or first phase of a stormwater management plan, the regulatory criteria has language in it that allows the Commission at their discretion to expand the buffers in any manner they see to address the specific site conditions. And on the right is the TMDL, some of the data. That's an example. We have lots of that out there. I just picked that example of what waters are impaired. And that serves as a good idea as where we should focus our efforts, perhaps, in terms of geographic location. This is in terms of how can buffers be an effective planning tool. I think it's very important to make a distinction between modeled buffers as well as ground truth buffers. I think generically we're headed in a good direction in terms of trying to identify where our high quality waters are. And Mattawoman certainly is a high quality water. I would like to see the Commission, though, proceed where perhaps this buffer can be ground truthed a little bit and checked before any deliberative decision is made on a countywide planning level. It would be good science, and it would be compatible with how the RPZ and the critical area program is set up, where both of those programs are based on ground truth data. This is, based on my knowledge of this is a radar flown buffer that has been modeled and perhaps could use a little refinement, and I think in either direction, both inward or outward. And I think just in principles it would be a good thing to do before we proceeded. I like this slide because pictures are worth 1,000 words. To kind of build on what I was saying, as you can see, and this is Anne Arundel County, and I just picked this at random because it's hard to get good aerial photos of areas like this. As you can see, this area is very thickly buffered with lots of forests, but yet we have a sediment problem. And the rhetorical question, of course, why is that? Well, we can find a lot of sediment plumes from aerial photographs, but it's kind of quirky to see this one. Well, the simple answer to this one is that this was before stormwater laws. This area does not have stormwater management according to what we have today. Today's stormwater management law is very strict, and it requires we revert the site back to woods in good condition. So this site would probably help with that. Not only that, many of the sediment sources are not coming directly from the shoreline. Some of them are coming from farther away. So it's just an example of how something needs to be on a site-specific level, that a buffer overlay here would not necessarily have made a big difference. Again, how do we get a bigger piece of our nutrient pie? Again, I used nitrogen before as our keystone pollutant, but this could go for pretty much any of our keystone pollutants of sediment as well. Is what cleared lands do we have now that we can plant? To me personally, professionally in my work, I encourage this. I think this is a tremendous benefit on a watershed basis, to identify areas that are cleared now that we can plant again. This was open field at one time, and this area, you can't see it from the photograph, but this also has a wetland planting in it, and as well as some trees. They're much bigger now. I think getting bang for the buck, this is the kind of strategy I like to see, where the investment is very limited and you're reusing and recycling some of your older lands that are really causing the problem. If you go back to that pie chart I had before. This is not a stream in Charles County. I merely needed a good visual example. It's not far away, though. Another thing I like to do, and a good example of where we might focus some of our other resources, that instead of perhaps an overlay approach, is that identify some more of our streams as they've been shown in urban areas to be a major sediment source. Now, the TMDO program is doing that, so is the MS4 NPDES program, the county. But I think it's already there. It's something we can really build on in terms of, again, getting the most bang for our buck. And some streams don't have to be eroded. This is also a coastal plain stream where we do have sediment problems. This is a very common situation. And again, overlay buffers may or may not help this. And again, it would depend on a site-specific condition. But again, there's many sectors of our water quality issues on a planning level other than streams. I just merely respectfully use this as an example of one that I personally like to focus on in terms of an efficient and effective and practical solution to watershed issues. That's all I have now. Thank you very much. Oh, and one more, I'm sorry. This is an example of a stabilized stream, and again, I'm using it as an example. This would be a very good example of how on a watershed basis we can identify some of our problems on a ground level that perhaps a buffer overlay would help, but may not always. This is, again, it's a major sediment source in many of our urban areas, which is not being addressed, I think, as much as I'd like to see under the current programs. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that we have let's take this time now, since I think we have everyone that's coming here, and we'll start with the introductions. Mr. Teeger, if you'd start.
Joe Teeger, Planning Commission.
Joan Jones, Planning Commission.
Ken Robinson, County Commissioner.
Reuben Collins, County Commissioner.
Courtney Edmonds, Planning Commission.
Steve Bunker, Planning Commission.
Bobby Ricci, County Commissioner.
Deborah Davis, County Commissioner.
Okay, thank you all. Any questions for our guests? Mr. Teeger?
Where we've already have development and we have stormwater outfalls backed up into a lot of impervious surface, how do you suggest we address those as they impact the streams of the county?
Actually, I'm glad you asked that. That goes to my stream restoration slide, and given the time constraints, I didn't show all of the examples, but much of our stream erosion is from stormwater outfalls from pre-stormwater management development sites. And I think those are prioritized already under our municipal NPDS stormwater permit for restoration under the capital projects program. I think now, in addition to that, the county already has strategies to go beyond that in terms of satisfying some of the TMDL requirements placed over that. Stream restoration is also a part of MDE and Corps of Engineers wetland permitting mitigation requirements. So we already have kind of three primary arms of stream restoration, and I think at this point anything the commissioners can do to encourage, if I may say, fixing up our existing problems before we have the current criteria in place, I think that really gets the most bang for our buck.
Any other questions or comments?
I seem to be the only one thinking. We have quite a number of plans for developments that are not yet under construction, some of which are still being grandfathered under the old system. Is there any benefit to requiring these pending developments where they haven't turned anything yet, still just paper plans, making them meet ESD?
That would depend on the site. That's a very site-specific answer. Being grandfathered from the current stormwater law, where you have, and I'll say the word in case, it's environmental site design to the maximum extent practical, or ESD to the MEP. That's the strategy of divide and conquering your pavement and trying to buffer it with green areas. So you mimic woods in condition in your post-development scenario. The success of that many times is a result of your site and your project goals. It'll be more challenging with perhaps a commercial pavement area with a lot of pavement as opposed to a residential subdivision. Grandfathering from that law is not necessarily a big step backwards. The previous stormwater law of 2000, before this law, was in itself already fairly effective, I think, in terms of putting back a site before it was built. I think what the new stormwater law does now, it tries to meet the same overall conceptual goal, but it kind of tells you a little more how to do it in a more natural way. So, in other words, at the risk of oversimplifying, the new stormwater law, it tries to de-emphasize putting devices in large ponds on a property, and rather divides and conquer your flow into smaller drainages, perhaps alleviating the need for a structure. So being grandfathered from that law is not necessarily a huge step backward. So to answer the question, I think in some cases it might be a benefit to require that, and in some cases it would be very little return on your investment. And again, it would depend on the site character and the project goals and what you're building.
Other questions? Ms. Jones?
One, with respect to the photo you show of the major sediment, what is your corrective action plan when you have them? Is it to dredge and get rid of the sediment and allow it to grow over with trees? And what's the difference if it's on public land versus private land? Do you try to do anything?
Oh, that's an excellent question. First, the first thing we do is find out what's causing it. Obviously, typically the first step is do a watershed study. We want to find out what was developed long ago, before we kind of know what we know now, what was developed under the new stormwater criteria, and basically identify the areas that are overloading the stream. Typically, a stream like that is overburdened from not necessarily dirty water, but it's overburdened from flashy water. Or put another way, many times the manner the water leaves land is more important than how clean it is. So if your water is treated for quality, sometimes if you get a sudden surge of stormwater that exceeds what happened in nature, it overburdens the stream bank and destabilizes it, and that's what you're seeing there. So the first thing is we're going to go far upstream as we can, try to identify the source and see if we can do it as close to the source as possible. There's many ways to do that. If it's if you're having a new development around it, it can be part of your redevelopment project under the redevelopment regulations of the new stormwater law, which requires actually that you clean up some of the old one. If it's an old built-out area, then there's opportunities for perhaps breaking up some curb and gutter, or putting in underground storage below the street if it's a highly developed area. And then once you investigate the possibilities, then you go to the stream bank itself. And typically, yes, you do armor the stream. There's different ways of armoring the stream, and a lot has to do with the velocity. Today we like to armor a stream in the greenest way possible. We want to use vegetation on the banks. We want to put back the stream curves as they were, because a curvy stream is a happy stream. And if we can't do that, sometimes the velocities and the development that occurred long ago is just too severe. We can armor it with what's called step pools or something like that. And it's a stage-by-stage analytical process.
Thank you.
Mr. Bunker?
You showed the stream valley delineation from Mattawoman, and I guess that's from 2006, and you talked about the need to ground truth. Do you think you could actually do that with LiDAR data as well, or better than ground truthing?
I confess I'm not an expert at LiDAR and the manner in which that was delineated. I did research it, and I did get familiar with it. My desire is to see that be calibrated, if that's the proper term, to the degree that it could be applied much as the RPZ, Resource Protection Zone, is applied today. Currently, the RPZ regulations do allow, in fact, they require that the setback be established once you investigate the land and the site. And I guess that's what I'm saying, is I'd like to see it congruent and be with that. Based on what I've looked at in the buffer, I do see some potential for some error simply because of the mechanism used and overflying. And I believe there's an error, maybe a couple areas, for instance, that sink down and come up again, but that area is shown as a rise, for instance, because of the nature of the radar signal. But I confess I'm not an expert in that technique.
And in terms of anti-degradation provisions for the Tier 2 streams, do you think a stream valley protection along with stormwater environmental site design would meet the anti-degradation provisions for the Tier 2 streams?
I think my generic answer is yes, it can. It would depend on the site. When I worked at MDE, I actually worked in that anti-degradation policy. I actually applied it to some wetland permit situations, and that was the history of that is important to know. That was developed in the 80s when we had little or no stormwater management we had today. So that was EPA's and MDE's attempt to recognize for the first time that we do have non-point source pollution problems. Until that point, much of our thinking was what came out of ends of pipes, factories and things. And then around the 80s, we turned around. We had a lot of studies that showed us our biggest problem really isn't what's coming out of big pipes, and that's a problem too. But our biggest problem is what's coming off the land and the non-point source pollution. So that policy, that's where it really gained a lot of its fuel. I think today, with the stormwater law, the NPDES requirements, the TMDL goals under the watershed implementation plans we have to meet now, I think that basically does that. So I think to answer your question, I think If we observed adequate buffers, and Tier 2 already requires a 100-foot buffer by MDE policy, and that buffer area can be expanded already to include slopes and wetlands and whatever, I think combined with ESD to the MVP today, which requires that you put back a site as wood condition, can potentially meet those requirements.
Thank you.
Madam President.
Commissioner Davis?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Durr, for your presentation. I have a question regarding whether you had an opportunity to review our current comprehensive plan.
I'm sorry, say.
Our current comprehensive plan, have you had the opportunity to review it?
Yes, I did. I did look it over. You had two scenarios, and you have your merged scenario now with your density restrictions and the buffer and the priority preservation areas. Yes.
All right. And how would you rate our current comprehensive plan, the one we have in existence, not the two proposed scenarios?
The merged one?
The one that's in existence now, where'd that come from?
The
2006.
with the deferred development district. Yes, that's the one. I've been working under that scenario. Actually, as you saw, I've been doing work in the county now for 8 years for planning and growth management. I'm actually under a open-ended contract with them now on call for their own planning and growth management, and I've been working under that scenario since that time. And conceptually, it made sense to me in many ways because the deferred development district, the goal of that was actually, well, there's some debate on whether it's really effective or not. To me, it seemed a very reasonable approach in terms of trying to address leapfrog development. I do realize it intrudes into the Mattawoman area, and I think when I did review some of my projects, I showed you my project resume, I advised the county, very rigorously on how to address those issues. And again, I think it comes down to what's on the ground because EPA has actually certain studies which came out lately in the last few years which show that sometimes if you spread out low-density development, that effect of spreading it out on a county perspective, if you back off and look at the county, can almost backfire sometimes in terms of, yeah, you have the less density, but now you require all the pieces between the housing units and the pods of development now are more used by human activity. It actually encouraged more utility line construction, some road connections, and while I'm not saying the opposite, therefore, is good, I'm just saying there's no really easy fix, and that to me seemed like a reasonable approach to address that issue. And certainly, a lot of what we did in the last 10 years with the road projects and the development projects were kind of counting on that, and we're developing accordingly. So I don't see any fatal flaws in that procedure.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I have a couple questions.
Sure.
You mentioned the county, well, let me just say that our county is always grappling with stormwater management, particularly in our older communities. And you sort of touched on, and I was just wondering if you'd elaborate on, as development occurs in areas that are older, close to or adjacent, do you have any thoughts on any kind of synergy that could result in fixes as the new development comes in?
Yes, so that's actually, as you probably saw in my presentation, that's very close to my heart, is basically going where the problems are. And to me, in an urbanizing area, and I know Charles County has tremendous pressures now to balance these, I think that is where we should be focusing, is trying to clean up some of the problems of our past. The new stormwater law, in fact, as I mentioned before, allows for that with their redevelopment regulations, where if you're defined as redeveloping a property as opposed to developing a new, you have a burden to clean up some of the previous problem. That's probably one of the most prevalent mechanisms we have right now. Then the other one is our MS4 NPDES program, where right now I've actually worked on a couple of those projects where streams MDE has requested the county identify problem areas in streams to fix up, much like we talked about earlier, and how do you define whether there is a stream. I think that's probably will give us many times more bang for our buck, is to find creative vehicles to clean up a stream. And not only that, you're going to get extra credit for the stream for your TMDL watershed implementation plan requirements. I didn't touch on it too much in my presentation, but one of the ultimate goals we can lead up to here is to get even more bang for our buck is to nutrient trading, which is going to be looked at as a solution to many of our problems. The more streams, and again, I'm just picking streams as just a really good example, the more streams we can clean up, the more credit you get for that stream to trade off somewhere else if you can. It's a lot of bang for the buck.
And Mr. Durr, along that same line, you talk about the tools in our toolbox, and we talk about the plan, either be it the 2006 plan or whatever our ultimate 2012 plan looks like. So the real issue is the plan is one thing, but it's all of these other tools and how we implement them and how we effectively merge the various different requirements that we have on us. I mean, ultimately, would you agree that's what's really going to make the plan? What we put on paper is really just one part of it?
Exactly.
Thank you. Commissioner Robinson?
You sort of touched on it briefly, I think, in response to Ms. Jones's question. When we have a catastrophic natural event, such as we had here in Charles County last summer, how much does that put us back when something like that happens in terms of what we're trying to accomplish?
Wow. Well, that it can put you back. I was pretty busy at the company getting emergency authorizations for repairs and streams, and after that, and it can put you back. The thing to remember is, even before we were here, we had catastrophic events, and that's nature reminding us who's boss. So we can't plan for everything, but many of the requirements today do allow for very high peak storm events, both in our stormwater law and just for safety reasons, as well as in redevelopment criteria that we're required to do today. I don't have a simple answer to that other than if we have to put as much foresight as we can into our design, but we have to weigh that against the cost. Again, remember the term in the stormwater law is practicable. I forgot the Webster definition for that, but practicable means not just inexpensive, but also can it work, and is it match the amount of effort you put into it.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Durr. Appreciate your... Did you come all the way from Baltimore?
Yes, and I was very happy to do so. Thank you.
Hope you have good weather going back. And I see that Planning Commissioner Lou Grasso's arrived, if you'd like to join us up at the dais. And next on our agenda, we're a few minutes late, but we'll just keep going, is Center for Watershed Protection. Mr. Bill Stack. Good evening, Mr. Grasso. And good evening, Mr. Stack.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Throat's a little dry. Again, my name is Bill Stack. I'm the Deputy Director of Programs for the Center for Watershed Protection. I've worked there for 2 years, but I've been on their board of directors for about half a dozen. Prior to working for the center, I managed the surface water programs for Baltimore City for about 30 years or so. The Center for Watershed Protection is a national nonprofit environmental consulting firm. We work, help communities, local governments, EPA, state governments, nonprofits. We work in places like Hawaii and Guam, but most of the work, about 60% or so, is within the Chesapeake Bay watershed, where we're integrally involved in the Bay, TMDL, and the WIPs and stormwater permits. We have about 22 engineers and scientists. We're located in Ellicott City, just west of Baltimore. We also have a Charlottesville, Virginia office. The first thing that really struck me when we were asked to come and comment on your dilemma was the nutrient load allocations that were handed to Charles County by the Maryland Department of the Environment. Different sectors are shown across the bottom of the screen. You can see the 2009, nitrogen loads for agriculture, urban, septic, forest, and wastewater, and the 2020 target. And I've circled in red 3 different areas. The urban waste load allocation is the first circle. Really shows that Charles County is going to have to do a lot of work to address stormwater issues between now and 2020. Septic system, even more work. The septic loads, the 2020 load projections are just incredible. But what makes Charles County very unique is the wastewater load allocations increased tremendously. And that tells you that there theoretically is tremendous capacity in your sewered areas to accommodate growth. So even though I'm not a planner would have to think, well, how can I save the county and the citizens money and take advantage of this wastewater capacity? Obviously, you want to try to steer growth in areas that have this capacity and avoid additional septic systems, and also increase the amount of development that would be required by the state's current standards. Easier said than done, of course. And I thought I would talk these waste load allocations. I'm sure everyone is aware of the consequences of not meeting them. Of course, a lot depends on the election next fall as well. When I worked for Baltimore City, we ignored EPA and we were slapped with a consent decree. And I'll tell you, it's not a nice thing. It's very costly. It ties your hands. And I would recommend trying to meet these waste load allocations as much as possible. So I mentioned the planning process and the 3 bars and how it would make sense to try to steer growth in these areas that do have capacity. But how do you do that? And one of the major questions, is for the impaired watersheds, where you have this capacity, does it make sense to add development? So that's why you have tools such as the water resources element. And I understand that the water resources element, which was meant to be used as an iterative process to develop the plans, and you'll see circled in red, the Center for Watershed Protection developed the tool that counties use to account for load reductions, etc. I understand that the water resources element is going to be applied after the fact as more or less a forensic assessment of the merged plan. Excuse me one second. That's fine, because we heard there are other tools available to address these load reductions. But I want to digress a little bit and talk about some of our expertise and why I think that the center can help the county meet your load reductions, meet the dilemma that I just talked about of increasing density in impaired watersheds. We've worked in developing WIPs for various counties, Talbot, Caroline, Carroll, Anne Arundel. We are recognized as national experts. If you Google our name, you'll see that we are the national expert in watershed planning, as well as coastal zone issues, where we do a lot of work. We've worked in a lot of counties to address subsidence, like on Eastern Shore and Dorchester County. Climate change, whether you believe it's natural or not, there are some real issues. The severe storms that we had last year, I guess you understand firsthand what the effect of sea level rise can have on the county. We're working with the Bay program. I'm on the stream restoration panel. I can tell you I think that the amount of credits that we'll be able to achieve for different best management practices will increase substantially, which is good news. It adds to our toolbox. We have expertise in stormwater financing. We're working on a couple of stormwater offset fees. And we've also worked in an area that I think could really help the county, and that is tracking dry weather sources of sewage discharges from leaks that are off everybody's radar screen. But every community that has inflow and infiltration issues also has leaky pipes during other times of the year in other parts of the system. And we found, for instance, in Baltimore City that these can account for as much as 15 to 20% of the nitrogen load. That's off everybody's radar screen. And we're working now with Montgomery County to try to get a handle on their leaky pipes. So that's just an aside. So as you heard, the comp plan is not the only tool in the toolbox. The water resources element is a good tool. Highly recommended, but there are other tools, different scales, watershed planning. The county has several good watershed plans which will have to be reconciled with the merge plan. Site planning is another scale, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, and some of your questions were directed to that. Codes and ordinance review is huge, potentially silver bullets. And of course there are different programs that are evolving as we speak that are in the toolbox, such as stream restoration. And that program in and of itself is just going to increase in value over the course of the next year. Once we look at and refine the numbers, it'll be a much more useful tool than it presently is. Just an example of some of the work that we've done on better site design. How does one take a development such as this and keep the same number of units but increase the green space and reduce nutrients? We've worked with several communities to show how this can be done by increasing the density and using low-impact development and environmental site design techniques. In this one example, we showed that the conventional development costs about $2.4 million compared to the clustering, which cost close to $900,000, but we ended up with 45% nitrogen reduction and 60% phosphorus reduction. So this is a tool in our toolbox and something that we might want to consider for some of these grandfather cases. We've done a number of site planning roundtables where we work with different stakeholders and we develop a consensus on the building process, identifying different codes and ordinances that impede environmentally sensitive design. Some of the stakeholders that we've worked with include, of course, planning agencies, health department, watershed advocates, urban forestry people, the fire department. This is just an example, elected officials such as yourselves. And the key programs that all really are potential tools to meeting the environmental water resources goals are identified here. Zoning ordinances, you saw how just increasing the density in that one site allowed for substantial reductions in nutrient in nutrients. So these are just some of the things that when we work with different communities and do a codes evaluation through a consensus-based process, these are some of the programs that we look at. We will look at things such as street width, street length, parking codes, and find out what a county can live with, and then determine how that might translate to a nutrient load reduction. So in general, this involves an in-depth review of these standards and ultimately determining where in a county they might apply. And then the bottom line, once we reach consensus, determine if we reduce street lengths or widths, the minimum standard, by 5 feet countywide on all major roads. How does that translate in terms of a nutrient load reduction? And this is just one example of the process we go through where we assemble the stakeholders and we'll look at cul-de-sacs and ask questions. What is the minimum turning radius? Is it less than 35 feet or 36 to 45 feet? And I have a handout of this presentation. I don't want to waste your time. So in conclusion, my recommendations, I understand that the water resources element is being developed by consultants. I would recommend that be critiqued, a peer review by insiders such as us, or there are others as well who have some inside knowledge of the Bay program, the weaknesses in the model, what's going on in towards accrediting best management practices. And certainly, once the comp plan is developed, then the watershed plans will have to be, the comp plan will have to be integrated into the watershed plans. We also recommend some sort of consensus site planning roundtable that would result in a quantitative code and ordinance review to see how that might help you meet your WIP requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, investigating some of these leaky sewers to find out if you can get nutrient reduction credit and whether that might help address some of the impairment issues. And just some suggestions for your consultant working on the water resources element. I would recommend that they double check the watershed boundaries that the state uses, because we found substantial errors in several of the WIPs that we looked at. Double check the on-site disposal system assumptions. I see that was already recommended. And you should really expect more credits for stream restoration. That's going to be a silver bullet for a lot of jurisdictions. Now, redevelopment, wherever possible, is an extremely valuable tool because you get credit for nutrient reduction that is just, it doesn't cost you anything. It's a win-win situation, and it's in Baltimore City, when I worked there, of course, I realize that's different. We figured that we could get as much as 25% of our TMDL met through redevelopment. In Baltimore County, I think they felt that they could get as much as 5% through redevelopment. So in conclusion, I realize that I didn't talk a lot about retrofitting, but you do have a lot of private facilities. That's also like gold if you can work with those communities and retrofit them. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Commissioner Collins and then Commissioner Robinson.
Thank you for your presentation. Now, I was curious, you mentioned as recommendations to critique WREs. It was my understanding that the water resource elements and what was implemented by the county, in fact, followed state criteria. And so is it your observation that the WREs throughout the state have some deficiencies from a county-to-county basis?
No, not at all, but I looked at the WRE that was done in 2006 or 7 for for Charles County, and it's a tool. The WRE evaluated the 3 planning scenarios, and if you apply the WRE today, you'll find that none of the scenarios will meet the current TMDL waste load allocations. But what I'm saying is that the WRE is supposed to be an iterative tool. It was applied correctly, but was it optimized so that you could maximize your load reductions? I can't say. What I'm recommending is that I understand that you're going through an existing WRE analysis for the merge plan. What I'm recommending is that someone peer review that to make sure that it is being done in an iterative fashion to find out if at all possible there was something missed in the planning process. That's all I'm saying.
No, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Your experience and expertise is obvious. Does the Center for Watershed Protection, your organization, what I have not heard from your presentation or the presentation that preceded yours was anything about potable water and water supply and how that relates to a water resources element. Is that beyond your area of expertise, or did you just choose not to address that tonight?
Well, I'm aware of the issues that Charles County faces regarding potable water. A few years ago, I chaired the Maryland Water Monitoring Council and worked with the Maryland Geological Survey, and we studied Charles County and as well as Carroll County, and I reviewed the issues that Charles County has with potable water. I did not address them because our expertise is more in source water protection and not quantity.
Would you suggest we seek guidance from the Maryland Geological Survey for that aspect of our WRE?
They are the experts.
Thank you.
Ms. Jones?
Could you possibly speak to the effectiveness of the newly recommended state septic systems over the current one in terms of its ability to reduce nutrient loads?
I'm not an expert per se in that technology. I understand that you get a 50% nutrient credit. I've talked to experts who feel that it's probably less because of the variability in flow and temperature and so forth. So really that's all I can say about it.
Mm-hmm. And the other question, I'm not sure if this is outside your area, there was mention of utility line construction. And the question I have is, that is something that has occurred in the county that has changed the landscape drastically in some areas. Is there an effect when utility lines are constructed and trees are removed on the site development, especially with respect to water or streams, when trees are removed under the power lines that come through, in terms of the negative effect on the environment, if any?
Well, absolutely. I'm not saying that there is always an effect. There are best management practices that are required. It would really depend on a site-by-site basis. But I think we have some good tools, but they're limited, and especially with respect to sediment control. There's no way that you can develop a site, even if you apply the best sediment control technology, and not have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
minimize that impact. And power lines going through over hill and over dale and across streams can be especially damaging.
Are there regulations regarding them as far as you know?
The only regulation, I would imagine that there are standard permits, construction permits for utility lines. There were when I used to be in charge of Baltimore City's surface water programs.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Bunker?
Just one question. Is there a way to work backwards with your water resources element? In other words, take your WIPs and maybe your watershed plans and work back up to a water resources element to see where development should occur and what densities to minimize or to meet your TMDLs? I mean, I know we're going to run a scenario, water resources element for a scenario that we've already devised, but is it possible to go the other way? Does that make sense?
To take your
TMDLs
right.
and your watershed plans and work back up and see where development should occur at one density in order to meet the WIPs instead of going down, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, there certainly is a way of doing that. You can use the water resources element to optimize a theoretical best optimal development that will meet your WIPs, but then you have to balance that with your water quantity issues and wastewater issues. But that's what it's a good tool for that at a very gross level. You could run it frontwards or backwards.
It seems like one of our issues is that most of our current development, of course, is in the Waldorf area, in the Mattawoman watershed. And you said that we'd be very difficult to meet our Mattawoman TMDLs if we continue to develop in that area. But it seems like if you don't develop in Waldorf, you're basically shifting that loads to other watersheds that might have a difficulty meeting their TMDLs. So given that we already have development patterns in Waldorf, we already have sewer in Waldorf and a lot of infrastructure, I'm wondering if it seems to me that it's going to be difficult for the Mattawoman to meet its TMDLs, given that our development patterns are already in some way set, if that makes any sense.
It's going to be very challenging. I ran into the same issue. We worked on a plan for Baltimore Harbor to address the TMDLs there, and it was impossible to meet those numbers. But there are a lot of, before saying that it's impossible here for Mattawoman, I would have to look at some of the tools that are in the toolbox to see, for instance, how many streams could be restored, how many private stormwater facilities could you retrofit, how many retrofitting we found on municipal property you can only do maybe 12%. But on private property, if you can encourage retrofitting on private property, big box developments provide incentives, and that's where a stormwater utility might be that incentive for a Walmart to provide stormwater management, because they might get a credit if they put stormwater management or if they upgrade for stormwater management. There, before writing off Mattawoman Creek, I would have to know more about what is tried and then look at the toolbox, which is evolving. And I mentioned one big question is, do you have I&I problems, inflow and infiltration with the sanitary system? If that's the case, then I would certainly look to see whether you have any leakage which could be contributing to the impairments. So it's a struggle, it's a dilemma, but before writing off Mattawoman, I guess I would have to look at it in more detail.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's advocating writing off the Mattawoman. I know there's a lot of, the big part of Waldorf that has no stormwater management at all was actually put in before stormwater management. So I think retrofitting and redevelopment of Waldorf has a high potential for improving water quality, if not at least holding the line.
Well, redevelopment is especially, you almost have to look beyond 2025. Personally, I think that EPA, there's no way EPA is going to be able to meet the 2025 despite their best intentions. They want to put the practices on the ground by 2025, and that's going to be tough. But they're still, it's a valiant effort. But in terms of redevelopment, I think we have to look at almost generations. And instead of saying, well, we can't do anything now about redevelopment, so it doesn't make sense to have a plan in place to retrofit these areas. Think about maybe next generation, set the ball in motion now, 25 or 30 years or 40 years from now. There might be enough redevelopment for there to be some substantial improvements.
Any other questions? Mr. Teager?
You very briefly passed over just mentioning stormwater utility districts. There are many of the outfalls, individual outfalls are individually permitted, and therefore there's liability, I guess you'd say all around, both governmental and private. How would the formation of a stormwater utility district encourage or fund the retrofitting of particularly private stormwater outfalls?
Well, most stormwater utilities would be applied county-wide regardless of individual stormwater utility districts. And without understanding how your specific districts are set up, there would be a fee that would be based on an equivalent residential unit that everyone would pay in the county regardless of the specific district. That's what I was talking about. If that is not practical in Charles County, again, I would have to know a little bit more about how you charge an existing environmental fee of like $4 or something. I'm not sure, but that's what I thought. You charge an existing fee in order to fund the WIPs and so forth. That's supposed to increase. Most jurisdictions in the state, even a rural jurisdiction like Talbot County, are considering some financing mechanism like a stormwater utility, and almost every stormwater utility in the country allows for credits that provide incentives for large lot development like your Walmart and private homeowners to try to reduce as much stormwater as possible on their site. In fact, Baltimore City, one of the poorest jurisdictions in the state of Maryland, is developing a stormwater utility right now. They're in discussion with the development community, who are very interested in this concept of being able to retrofit large lot developments and earn credits.
We're sort of chuckling because that was tried around these parts. And at any rate, are there any other comments or questions? Okay, at this point I'd like to offer everyone at the dais an opportunity to share their thoughts and close with the Planning Commission Chair, Mr. Courtney Edmonds. Mr. Teager, would you like to start?
There was a lot of discussion. Both speakers talked about the necessity that the county of having to deal with stormwater, both the existing stormwater issues and avoiding future stormwater issues. We have this problem because it hasn't been dealt with in the past, and so we have a lot of historical issues that the public is now going to have to pay to repair. I tend to think of this, and I have thought about this a lot over the years, as essentially we've been drawing on a bank account, which is the ability of our environment to deal with the waste we generate. And our bank account's about empty. And it's time to start saving, i.e. putting back, paying back to the environment. And in this county, where the hopes for more tourism, more fishing, the avenue is going to be cleaner water. And that's a cost that we're going to have to spread out over everyone that's involved, the private side and the public side alike. And unfortunately, every one of these mechanisms and everyone and the two speakers have talked about the fact it isn't going to be cheap. So everyone just better get used to the idea. Conditions, restrictions are going to get tighter, and you're going to pay to retrofit what was done wrong in the past. And I hope the comp plan, as we do it, acknowledges these issues going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teager. Ms. Jones?
No, I'd just like to say I appreciate the commissioners giving us the opportunity to have this additional information. I think it has been very helpful in terms of our having a better understanding of environmental issues that we need to look at as we work to develop the plan or update the 2006 comprehensive plan. There was just one area that and I don't know if either of the presenters would have, is what the effect of our existing aquifers have on what capacity there is to provide safe drinking water into the future for this county. I know one of them, I believe, is the Patuxent Aquifer, and whether there are any studies on how much water is there and how long it will last.
Would you like Mr. Sack to come up and respond? Can you respond to that, sir?
I know there.
You have to. It's being taped, so you need to speak into the microphone.
I'm sorry, I won't be but a moment. I was part of a study many years ago. My recommendation is for you to work with the Maryland Geological Survey. I know that they are working with the U.S. Geological Survey as well as the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, in studying this issue.
Mm-hmm. And Ms. Jones, staff are here, and I'm sure they're taking note, so they will follow up with you. Thank you. Commissioner Robinson?
The meetings over the past 2 weeks have been an invaluable learning experience, I think, for members of both commissions, and they do not happen in a vacuum. So on behalf of everyone up here, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the clerk of the commissioners, Denise Ferguson, for coordinating everything that's happened over the last week. Thank you, Ms. Ferguson.
Thank you. Commissioner Collins?
Yes, I would also like to express my appreciation for the work done by staff in preparation, and I'd also like to make reference to the daunting task I believe is ahead for the Planning Commission, because this dialogue is extremely important to us as a community, and unfortunately during this process, which should be a process that we should appreciate as a community as a whole, because we are reflecting on the future of Charles County, our community. It is my hope that the citizens recognize that the body that is in place, the Planning Commission, is taking on an extremely important task to review the type of information that we've looked at today, the last couple of weeks, and tried to come up with some type of plan, some type of map, which reflects the needs and interests of the entire community. And that's why I'm saying that is a daunting task, and so I certainly respect and appreciate the work that you're about to do.
Thank you, Commissioner Collins. Mr. Grasso?
I've always described Charles County as an emerging growth community for the last 10 years, and I think information that's imparted like this is very helpful, because I do think that the issue of growth and the concern we all have for the environment can be a balanced thing. And that's what we have to do, is find a balance. And I think that information like this is very useful in trying to accommodate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Commissioner Davis?
Yes, I would just like to add that this has been really helpful, and I'm sure to the commissioners as well as to the Board of Commissions, this has been helpful. And I'm ready and willing to hand it over to you guys to do what you have to do and come back with an answer that balances growth and the environment. So good luck.
Commissioner Rucci?
Yes, I'd like to thank all the speakers the last 2 weeks. It was a lot of information, and the audience for coming out tonight and last week. I think the Planning Commission got a big task ahead of them and the staff, and good luck. So all the help you need, we'll give you.
Mr. Bunker?
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to have people come and talk about this issue. It's clear that we're in a much more complex environment than we have been in the past with the WRE, the watershed resources, water resources element, the TMDL, the WIPS, Septic Task Force, and Plan Maryland. It's very complex. I've been looking in the Maryland Independent, and there's a lot of people talking about we just need to tweak our 2006 plan, but it's clear to me we are in a totally new environment. We really have to look forward, and we have to try to incorporate some of these new elements into our plan. So I'm looking forward to trying to tackle that. Thank you.
Before I turn it over to Mr. Edmonds, just two quick things. We were unable to fulfill the request for someone from Stephen Fuller's organization to do a review and a briefing on the more detailed aspects of economic development as it relates to zoning. We have not forgotten about that. Our clerk is still working on that, and that may be something that will come on the agenda for the Planning Commission. And the other piece that is still missing is the transportation piece. But I wanted to make sure that the county commissioners were fully briefed first, and so we had our consultants in the last 2 weeks. All of the county commissioners have been briefed by our consultants who have been working closely with our staff on our transportation plan, particularly as we go into our tour letter process with the state Highway Administration, State Department of Transportation, excuse me. So that presentation will be made available to you, Chairman Edmonds, and to the Planning Commission, so that you can have the benefit of what's being done and what the discussions that are taking place with partner counties such as Prince George's County and at the state level, because I think that would be very helpful to you all. And so I would like to now pass this on to my colleague, Chairman of the Planning Commission, Courtney Evans, and I too will echo what my colleagues have said. Pursuant to the law, this is your baby, and we have complete confidence and trust that you're going to proceed with this, and God bless you, because it's one heck of a big job. So thank you very much, and thanks to everyone who's participated to date, and I'm sure there are going to be many, many opportunities in the future. Chairman Edmonds?
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. And thank you all for attending this evening, and also a very special thanks to Mr. Dare and Mr. Stack for presenting this evening, and also for all of the effort that went into planning both of these meetings. And we thank the Board of Commissioners for taking their time to display their interest and concern for what's going on with the comprehensive plan, and for pledging their support for the Planning Commission's efforts. Without regard to how anyone here at the dais or anyone there in the audience feels about the comprehensive plan and the direction it should take, I think that it's clear from the last two meetings that there are a variety of environmental, economic, and quality of life issues that need to be addressed in this plan. And hopefully without further ado, so to speak, we can get to the point where we can identify the additional studies and additional efforts and information that we're going to need, that we can use to base our development of the comprehensive plan on objective and tangible information relating to the well-being of Charles County. And I use this opportunity to call on my fellow commissioners to take what we've learned over the last 2 weeks into consideration, and we received a lot of information at the last meeting that we got from the general public and the various stakeholders regarding their issues and concerns with the proposed plan. It's a lot of information, and we have a lot on our plates. I think we're all in agreement that it is going to be a daunting task, but I believe that the Planning Commission has the capability on the Planning Commission and has the support of the Board of Commissioners and the county to get the job done. So I think it should be an honor for us to be in a situation where we get to take this action, but at the same time we have to understand and be humble that it's the needs of the county that outweigh the needs of the Commission, any particular stakeholder group. So on behalf of the Planning Commission, I look forward to working forward and developing the plan. We understand that it's going to be a challenge and there's going to be more information needed, but we will start that process moving forward with our next meeting on February 13th. Thank you.
I'd say this meeting's adjourned. Good evening, everyone.